did begin the program by talking about this. And once again, it involves the level of debt in this state, the Metro Tunnel, and how the Victorian taxpayer is consistently left holding the can for the government's cost blowouts. Our net debt, and I'll run through these figures, they almost seem like lollies, they're so high. Our net debt is currently sitting at $156.2 billion. That is expected to rise to $187.8 billion by 27-28. And by 2027, we will be paying $25 million a day in interest. And that doesn't include projects like the Suburban Rail Loop, which at the moment are not funded the whole way through the forward estimates. We only have the first lot of funding, and whether or not that gets federal funding as well. And then you'll remember last month on the eve of the grand final that the government announced that the Metro Tunnel is almost $1 billion over budget. Like I said, you throw these numbers out like lollies and they barely resonate because they're so huge. So the Treasurer was out this morning speaking to the media, and he was asked how he, brackets, the government, would pay off the Metro Tunnel cost blowout. And here's what he had to say.
It'll effectively come out of the consolidated fund to the extent that this is additional expense on the ledger. It will have an impact around the state's debt position, unless, of course, I can find offsetting value for the state, and that's exactly what I'm looking for at the moment. Look, I think I've said this regularly. We don't anticipate that we'll be able to do much in the space of taxes, given the budget before last was substantial. There was very little in the way of increased taxes in the last budget, although I'm pleased to see that we're making progress on the short stay levy processes through the Parliament, which hopefully will be concluded by Thursday of this week. That's more about policy than about revenue. So whilst I'm not ruling out adjusting the tax mix, we've reduced or removed some 64 taxes in the state in the 10 years that I've been Treasurer, and we're constantly looking at how we can recalibrate the tax mix to drive efficiency.
So let me sum that up for you. We're just putting it on the credit card. 133693. Your calls now, if we're not raising taxes to pay for this project, where is all of this magical money coming from? Are we just going to go out to the back garden and pick it off the tree? Leith Van Olsenen is the Chief Economist and co-founder of Macro Business. He's also a former Victorian Treasury and Australian Treasury worker. Leith, always good to have your time. Thank you.
G'day, Jacqui. How are you?
Look, I'm good. Firstly, the Treasurer sounds very unsure there.
Yeah, he does. He's certainly panicking. And look, for good reason. Victoria's got the highest state debt, and we've also got the nation's lowest credit rating, and state debt has blown out by nearly 320% in the decade since Labor's come to power. And what this basically means, Jacqui, is that per person in Victoria, we now, as of last financial year, Victoria's state debt was $28,000 per person, and that's 40% higher than the other major states. So we are absolutely drowning in debt. And as you said at the start, we've had blowouts, across all these infrastructure projects. Pretty much every major infrastructure project has had a huge blowout. And then, of course, we've got the Suburban Rail Loop coming, which is going to be an absolute, a $200 billion white elephant. So, there certainly is reason for Tim Pallas to be panicking, and the situation is not great.
As an economist, what do we have left to sell? And if we don't, what do we do about it?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, Victoria, like the other states, has basically sold off everything that's not bolted down. So we've privatised almost everything. We don't have a whole lot more to sell. And really, the only way to get around, well, not really get around, but to fund these cost blowouts is either through further borrowings, so i.e. debt, increasing taxes, or you cut back expenditure elsewhere. There's no other way around it. Those are the three options Tim Pallas has got. And it sounds like he's going to try and find cost savings elsewhere, but that then means he's obviously got to find cuts. So the question is, what's he going to cut back?
When we're talking about this level, though, how many cost savings, in inverted commas, can you actually find to find billions of dollars? Because surely if there are billions of dollars in cost savings, we should have done them by now.
Yeah, look, it's very difficult. I suggest one area where the where the state government should cut back is definitely the bureaucracy. So I'm not talking about frontline staff like teachers and nurses and police. I'm talking about bureaucrats here. And Victoria's public service has expanded by 59% over the 15 years to the 2023 financial year, and that was easily the largest expansion in the nation. And just to put that into perspective, while our public service numbers grew by 59%, New South Wales only grew by 28%. And Victoria's public servant wage bill grew by 152% over the same 15-year period, and that compares to New South Wales, where it grew by 87%. So I think the Victorian government needs to cut the fat with back office bureaucrats.
For our listeners, why is a credit rating important? It's now AA. I remember when it was AAA when I used to cover politics. It's the worst rated state in Australia, but for real terms and for those of us that live here, does that actually matter?
Yeah, it does. It does. So it was AAA until about, I think, 2020, and then the major ratings agencies downgraded it 2 notches. And the reason why it matters is basically like your mortgage. So if your credit rating gets downgraded, your interest rate goes up on your debt. And Victoria's debt servicing costs are now cost about $1 billion every year, and they're going to keep rising obviously as the debt pool grows. But they'll also grow. They'll also rise if the ratings agencies downgrade us again. And both S&P and Moody's have threatened the state government with downgrades if they don't get this debt situation under control.
So if they do that, how much extra would it cost to borrow money?
It's anywhere up to 0.5% of extra interest payments. So probably about 0.25%, but it does, I'm not sure what the exact figure is going to be, but we're talking about, a decent rise on a huge volume of debt, which just means we're going to be paying more in interest.
How do we compare to other states when it comes to managing our debt? Because one of the things that really annoys me, and this happened when we talked about the cost blowout to the Metro Tunnel, they said, it's the last government's fault. The last government was in a decade ago. So how can you go back and blame that government? And then another couple of the excuses that were given were the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza.
Yeah, look, it's pretty ridiculous to blame the last government when pretty much we've had a Labor government all bar, I think, one term since the late 90s. So,
yes.
Apart from the
Baillieu government.
And the Baillieu-Napthine government, it's been Labor since the turn of the century. So it's a bit ridiculous to try and blame the former government. And of course, this state government has done a whole lot of other dodgy things, like it's cancelled the Commonwealth Games, which cost us $600 million. It should never have agreed to those games in the first place. Nobody wanted it. It also cancelled the East-West toll road when they got into government. And then has it gone ahead and basically built another toll road that's similar? Well, to the process of building another one that's similar. So all these sorts of mistakes have cost us a lot of money. And then on top of that, we've obviously got, blowouts across pretty much every major infrastructure project across the state. So it's a pretty diabolical situation.
Oh, it really is, isn't it? And we spend an awful lot of time talking about this, Leith. I've spoken to you about this issue multiple times. So, I guess, we just have to cop the bill and generations will have to deal with it. It's almost like kicking the can down the road, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. Unfortunately, that's the situation we've been left with. And the suburban rail loop is going to just add more pain, because that is an infrastructure project that does not make any financial sense. It's going to be the biggest infrastructure project in history. And effectively, it's going to squeeze out the rest of the state from getting any, major infrastructure projects for potentially a generation, because all the funding is going to go into this one boondoggle. So look, it's incompetent stuff. The government should never have signed that project. The contracts to that project last year, they were advised against it, but they've done it anyway, and they've left us with a massive hole.
Leith Van Onselen is the Chief Economist and co-founder of Macro Business. He also used to work for the Victorian and Australian Treasuries. Leith, appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Jacqui. Speak to you next time.
Okay, so Leith Van Onselen